On May 8, 1993, the Museum of Broadcast Communications presented An Afternoon with Charles Osgood. CBS Radio's Poet in Residence, Mr. Osgood has received numerous broadcast awards, including the Washington Journalism Review's Best in the Business Radio Award 5 consecutive years for the Osgood File, and was a 1990 inductee into the Radio Hall of Fame. The moderator for the afternoon was John Callaway of WTTW, Channel 11.
We're going to spend the better part of the next hour with one of the most distinguished journalists in the United States, or in my opinion, in the world. And he also happens to be a broadcast journalist. He is a poet. As you know, he's called CBS Radio's Poet in Residence. I think he's America's radio poet laureate. He is an author. He is a news commentator. He is a correspondent. He is a television reporter and anchor man. He is a Father of the Year, voted Father of the Year, and we're coming into Father's Day, so that shouldn't go unpassed. Father of 5 children. He is a devoted husband. He is simply an extraordinary human being. You can't even conceive of achieving everything that he has achieved unless you got up, for example, at 3 o'clock in the morning. And that's what time he gets up. So, I mean, it makes sense. If you want to do these things, you got to get up at 3 o'clock in the morning. Now, before I introduce him, I think it would be appropriate if we just reminded ourselves of the grace and the wit and the wisdom of this man's work. And so let's just listen to him.
The Osgood File. I'm Charles Osgood on the CBS Radio Network.
He writes books, plays the piano, plunks the banjo, and dabbles in poetry. He's also one of the most listened to men in America. 20 times a week, Charles Osgood writes and anchors The Osgood File, heard daily on WBBM News Radio 78 and the CBS Radio Network. But things weren't always so wonderful.
Time is 12 and a half minutes after, make it 13 and a half minutes after 6 o'clock.
That's from 1967, when Charles Osgood was the morning anchor on WBBM's sister station, WCBS in New York.
This is News Radio 88, WCBS FM, New York.
Good morning. This is Charles Osgood, News Radio 88.
FM? Yes, FM. This tape is from WCBS's first day as an all-news station, only the all-news format was supposed to be on WCBS AM. In his first newscast, Charles Osgood had to explain it all.
The single-engine Piper Cherokee smashed into a radio transmission tower on High Island in Long Island Sound. At least 2 people were killed. There may be 3 other passengers on that plane. A search is going on. The plane crashed into the water. The radio tower was demolished. It was the AM radio tower for station WCBS and also for WNBC. Those stations were immediately knocked off the air.
Things have improved for Charles Osgood since then. He has 5 children and was once named Father of the Year. He's got a couple of Peabody Awards at home. The Washington Journalism Review calls him the best radio reporter in the business. He does news on TV, but prefers radio. He talked about that once.
Radio is everywhere. Can't tell you how often people have said to me, I was shaving this morning when I heard what you said on the Osgood File, and I almost cut myself. Or I was driving to work this morning and almost drove the car off the road. Well, it does make me feel a little guilty sometimes when I think of all the carnage I've caused over the years in the bathrooms and on the highways of America. But with all due respect for the television medium, and there are some things it does wonderfully well, I've always thought that radio is better, and for a lot of reasons. If television had come along first and then radio had been invented, we would be saying, isn't this really great? It's sort of like television, except that you don't have to look at it. For me, anyway, the pictures on radio are better. In fact, in TV, the pictures are too literal. What you see is what you get. But they're limited by the position of the camera, by the available light, the size of the screen, and all of that. Radio has no such limitations because it engages the mind, the imagination. Radio is such a part of our lives that we take it with us everywhere. I don't know exactly where you are right now or what you're doing, but I know one thing for sure. You're listening to the radio, you and 100 million others.
He knows how to tie a bow tie, not just clip one on. He has a host of honorary degrees. He's played at Carnegie Hall and with Branford Marsalis and the Tonight Show Band. He's even written a special song for this, WBBM News Radio 78's 25th anniversary as an all-news station.
Hi, this is Charles Osgood. News Radio 78 on your AM band for a quarter century in Chicagoland. News reports and all the sports, the traffic and the weather. Traffic and weather together. All news, all day, all night. Get all the news and get it right. For all those things you need to know, WBBM News Radio.
Charles Osgood is truly a Renaissance man. WBBM News Radio 78 is proud to welcome Charles Osgood to the Chicago Museum of Broadcast Communications.
Ladies and gentlemen, Charles Osgood. Charles, welcome.
Thank you. I didn't know you were going to play that banjo thing before I got on here. I might not have stepped on the stage.
We were deeply impressed by that, and I really think we should have a concert instead of an interview, but we don't have the right instruments here. Charles, as you know, this is the 25th anniversary of WBBM, and it was an extraordinary time for the station. Do you have similar memories? I mean, take us back a little bit, including the events we just heard on the founding of News Radio in New York, which was, what, a year earlier?
Yes, it was just a year earlier. We had a 25th anniversary celebration for WCBS just last year. And yes, indeed, can you imagine a more ignominious start for an all-news station to have an airplane hit its tower?
But that's news.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. And as you heard, we went on FM. But I don't think anybody believed when the format was changed to an all-news format. You know, at that time, radio was still trying to find its way. Television had established a certain place in the American home that I think was at one time held by radio. And although there were a lot of radio stations, a lot of radio listeners, you hadn't really defined the way radio would work out, so that you turned to one place on your dial for news, another one for classical music, another one for, and so on, for sports as we now can do. And but I don't think anybody would have believed that 25 years later that we would be sitting here celebrating that format, because formats were changing every couple of seasons, it seemed. But now that it's been established, it's just, to me, it's just remarkable that the role that this thing has come to play in our lives. We really do take it for granted.
And you were an anchorman and reporter for the first years?
Yes, the first. Believe it or not, when I started at WCBS in New York, I worked for a while at ABC Radio, at the radio network there, and I moved over to WCBS about 6 months before they went to the all-news format. And I was doing newscasts in the middle of the Pat Summerall disc jockey show. Most people
Yes.
can't believe that Pat Summerall was a disc jockey, but you were there. You know.
No, I wasn't there, but I remember being interviewed by Pat Summerall during the ~67 snow in Chicago. Here's this place kicker interviewing me about news. It gets complicated, folks.
Yes, it does. I remember what they did to promote him. We had two helicopters piloted. They didn't give you their real names. They said the helicopter pilots were described as Wilbur and Orville. And Pat, in the billboards advertising the station format, had a cape on, like Superman, with an 88 on the back of the cape, and he was advertised as Super Summerall. But that was before we got to the all-news format, and within a matter of months, I found myself sitting there really being the anchor, and Pat would come in and do the sports.
And
what reversed roles.
Were you the morning man anchor?
Lou Adler and I worked together in the morning. I did an hour myself from 6 to 7, and then Lou and I did an hour together from 7 to 8, and then he did the hour from 8 to 9 by himself. So between us, we did 6 to 9.
And if we recall correctly, it was William Paley who said, I want to do something with these CBS-owned stations other than say, I think he was a little concerned about kind of the talk format being a little inflammatory, not controllable, didn't want to spin records.
You know, strangely enough, considering the power that Bill Paley had, I mean, everybody was scared to death of him. And what he wanted, he almost always got. There was no question about that Bill got what he wanted.
By the way, he was the chairman of
Yes,
CBS, the legendary chairman
The
and founder of the
founder.
CBS.
I mean, there
Yes.
was no.
I mentioned that because I had an intern at TTW recently who didn't know who Frank Stanton was, so I'm careful to be parenthetical now.
Well, Bill Paley invented the idea of network radio, and he was the one who put CBS Radio together, and television came along later, and he did the same thing for TV. But he was a giant of a figure in our business, and when Bill Paley snapped his fingers, the earth shook. But something that he could not convince his subordinates to do was to turn WCBS into an all-news station. He thought it was a fine idea, and I'm told that as long before, as 10 years before they changed the format, he had gently suggested to Arthur Hull Hayes and to Sam Cook-Diggs and to others, these were vice presidents and presidents of the radio division, that maybe it would be a good idea to have a station that you'd be able to tune to and always find out within a few minutes important local information like traffic and weather and all of that, but within a span of 15 or 20 minutes, you would have a pretty good idea what was going on in the world. And they kept telling him, Mr. Paley, it just would never work. It was against everything that anybody had thought, and the old man was right, and not for the first time.
No, and for those of us who were ordered into it, even those of us who were news junkies were saying, all news? How are we ever going to be able to afford it? I remember when the top bosses in New York told us at BBM, if you'll just bring the station in '68 at a loss of a few $100,000, you'll be heroes forever. And we brought it in at a few $100,000 profit, and we were the Wonder Boys. So it's just an extraordinary piece of business to hire all these people when you could actually make money spinning records.
Well, it's the most expensive format that you can have. You know, it's very cheap to have somebody there playing records. And there are other things that you can do that are also very cheap. But if you're going to cover the news, a city like Chicago, a city like New York, if you're going to cover the world, well, we have the benefit of CBS News to help there. But you have to commit yourself to an awful lot of money. But Bill Paley was willing to do it. It turned out, after we got on the air a while, we discovered that there are ways that it can be done. There are things that people really needed to know. And you learn more from experience than from anything else.
I think one of the other miracles, when you really think about it, those of us who listen to news radio very frequently take it for granted. It's like turning on, it's like a utility. Yeah, I know, the light's on here today. So what? We got some water. So what? And yet when you stop to think about all the work that goes into that, then let's bring it to a more personal level. We're listening to BBM in the morning, and we hear you come on with one witty commentary or insight or feature after another. And I do a little writing, and if I can get one of those a month done, I'm saying, boy, I'm good. And you're knocking those things out. Charles, we get up at 3 in the morning?
I don't mean to contradict you, because I heard you say that I get up at 3.
Well, I just read your book.
I get up at 2:50. I now get up at 2:15.
So you got to check your facts.
I was getting up at 2:30 until I recently made the commitment to use the Nordic track for 20 minutes in the morning.
We're going to do about 15 minutes on that.
And I tell you, it's just terrific, John. I feel so much better
Charles,
now.
tell us about that.
I just feel so much better now.
This is Nordic Track Seminar, Part 1.
But my wife is really pleased that I got that commercial, because she's been trying to get me to do something for a long time now. But so 2:15 is.
So 2:15 is now when you get up. So
I leave.
Can we presume that you get up alone?
You definitely may presume that.
You never know.
I get up alone, John, and I dress in the dark, which probably explains a lot.
And by the way, is the routine you're now describing a routine that's fairly, have you changed over the years, anything as we go along this?
We were talking at WBBM yesterday morning about this with the morning people, John and Felicia and I, and John had said to me, are you used to this now, having all these years gotten up so early in the morning? And I said, no, I'm not used to this at all. What you get used to is feeling lousy all the time.
Now, you've written about the fact that you feel, you really do feel
tired.
Do you feel tired today?
I don't feel especially tired today, but tired is
because we can take a nap. This is a very easy group.
Tired is my normal mode, so I don't feel particularly tired when I'm tired.
But you dress in the dark.
I do dress in the dark.
Now, are we up to 2:45?
No, I don't get dressed until the Nordic track until about 25 minutes to 3. This is not a very, very precise schedule. We do the 20.
That's all right.
Do the 20 minutes, and then I take a shower and shave, and all of this takes place at an incredibly. The reason that I have to get up that early is because it all takes place at a very slow pace.
At
this hour of the morning,
hey, it's okay with us.
one does not rush about.
Right.
Because if you rush about, for one thing, if you rush about in the dark, very bad things happen to your toes and other parts of your body. So, so I move very slowly, and sometimes, I guess we've all had the experience. And in some ways, this is how I relate to my audience, the people that I'm talking to. I assume that the folks out there are like me. And when they first get up in the morning, it takes a while before all the burners are ignited. So sometimes I'll find myself you put on one sock, and then you wait for about 10 minutes before you put on the other sock. You know, you just kind of study the wall in between.
This is known as on the nod. Is that correct?
Yes. But
it's a description used for narcotics, I think. Yeah.
Oh, is it? I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I'm not familiar with those.
No, but I mean, you're just kind of getting into it. Okay, so you get that other sock on.
Yes. Well, then it would be very boring if I described every article of clothing.
Hey, it's been fairly exciting so far.
but I'm not ready to walk out the door until about 3:30, and that's when I do. And the drive.
I'm sorry. Do you have a breakfast? I mean, do you eat breakfast at home?
Generally not. No.
Do you read anything before you leave the house?
No.
Do you listen to anything?
No.
So this truly is a kind of solitary easing into the, not the day,
yes, it is.
but
well, the Nordic track gets you. It was a little different before I started doing that. But once you do that, actually, there's a little more blood in your brain than there would be otherwise. But I still don't read anything, and I still don't listen to anything or watch anything. I don't. Some people, when they do the exercise, they like to watch a television or something. But I found there's nothing on at that hour except people demonstrating exercise machines. Anyway.
But
anyways,
I told you this is the Nordic seminar. Do you get any ideas before you're out the door?
I don't even try to get ideas. I don't say to myself, people say, how can you sleep at night if you don't know what you're going to be doing the next morning?
Right.
But in some ways, I think it's better off. The brain is in a down mode. It's unplugged, and I do not think about what I'm going to do. However, Phil Chin, who is the producer of the broadcast, who lives on Long Island, and who has been producing my broadcast for 17 years now, and who is here in this audience, accesses the News Star. The wires, as you know, are stored in a computer at CBS. And from his home, he accesses the wires and looks at what's going on at say 10 or 11 o'clock at night, and sends that to me, faxes it to me at home. A suggested 10 or 11 pieces that are stories that might make subject matter for our pieces. And before I leave the house, I will go to the fax machine and tear that paper off the fax machine if I remember to do that. Otherwise, I wait till I get to the office, where he has also sent another copy of the same thing.
Knowing you as he does.
Knowing that I might forget sometimes to do that.
So you rip it off. Do you kind of glance at it, maybe think about it? I mean,
yes,
we're going to get you into the car.
I don't try to do anything about it. I just look at it so that I know that that's sort of what we have to work with today.
Mr. Osgood, in other words, we're hearing you in the way we hear in the world of theater, that great actors work in the moment as opposed to trying to anticipate everything. So you're kind of in the moment.
I found that you have to do that. I do 4 broadcasts each morning, and I do that 5 times a week, and I also do a commentary for CBS this morning on the television side. And there are occasional pieces for Sunday morning, and then you know that tomorrow you're going to be going to Chicago, and John Callaway is going to interview you at the Museum of Broadcasting, and then you're going to be going to something else, and there's a schedule of things that you're going to be doing that day and the day after that, and stories you're going to cover. You cannot just think about them all the time. If you try to put all that in your head, I think you'd go crazy. So I just think about the next thing. And I don't even worry about broadcast number 2 till I'm finished with broadcast number 1. I mean, I decide, what is the commentary on television going to be? And I know that it will be one of the broadcasts, probably broadcast number 1 of the 4 Osgood Files as well. It's in a slightly different version because on the television I have a minute and a half to do the commentary and 2.5 minutes on radio, of editorial time. So I think about what that first one is going to be, and from the things that Phil has faxed to me, I look for the one thing that I can do by myself. That is to say, it doesn't require interviewing somebody or any tape, because on the television side, it's an old-fashioned talking head kind of piece. Sometimes on the radio, I'll fold tape into it for that version because as I say, it is longer. But that's the thing that I'm thinking about more than anything else is broadcast number one.
I don't mean to pry too much, but to go back to 3:30 in the morning.
Yes.
You get in the car.
Yes.
Do you listen to the radio?
No.
I just want. This is interesting to me. So you're still there. You are. How long does it take to drive from New Jersey into the broadcast center?
At that hour, about
5 minutes.
12 minutes. Right. I live in Englewood, New Jersey, which is about 5 minutes from the George Washington Bridge. At that hour, there's hardly ever any traffic jams. It's surprising how few people are going to work at 4 o'clock in the morning. What's really surprising is how many people are going to work at 4 o'clock in the morning.
No, that's really the way to put
Yes,
it.
yeah, because although there are no traffic jams, there's thousands of cars crossing the bridge.
And so you get into the broadcast center by 4, and now what do you do?
Now I call up the story. So far, all I have is Phil's assurance that there is a story there by that on that subject, and he tells me what wire it's on, so that I find it and look at it. And I mean the one that I have sort of tentatively suggested as a story idea, and then I try to think of what can I do with it, because I don't just tell the story. I try to think, what is this? What is this an example of? What have we here? What can I say about it or do with it that isn't being said by others during the hourly newscasts? In other words, what I do is a treatment, and I have to think of how can I treat this. And very often it turns out that although it's a good story and an important story and an interesting story, it's not something that I can get my teeth into in that way, and so I'll pass over it and do something else.
So just kind of something has to hit a bell with you that plays to a context or a reference or a part of your past that you can frame it. In other words, an idea has to come into play.
Yes, that's right. The story is one thing and the idea is something else.
Yeah, it seems to me that's the most remarkable thing. Murray Kempton once addressed a group of CBS radio news directors. And Murray Kempton is the great Newsday columnist. And Murray said, the reason I'm speaking today, news directors, instead of you, is because I've had 2 or 3 original ideas in my life. And that makes me the outstanding person that I am. In his life, Osgood, we're talking 4 a day.
I think Murray is being very, very humble about that. He comes up with more ideas than most people do.
But then when you get these ideas, I mean, are these things that just come out of your being, or do you have to make a few phone calls, talk to a few people? I mean, how does that work?
I have found, others tell me that they don't mind waking somebody up and talking to them at 4 o'clock in the morning, but I've never been very good at that.
Thank you for reminding me we're still at 4 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so if you call somebody up, in fact, it's 4 o'clock in the morning on the East Coast. It's 3 o'clock in the morning, and 2 o'clock in the morning, and 1 o'clock in the morning in the other time zones. So you don't make a lot of phone calls there.
All right, so this is all really coming out of everything that you've experienced, everything you've read. It's a constant contexting and referencing and making points of distinction.
It is, but it's not just that I carry around this tremendous amount of information. I mean, if you're doing the news for 25 years, day after day after day after day, you do build up a certain store of recognition. This reminds you of something else that happened before. It reminds you of a story you covered one time. That's bound to happen. So you bring a little experience with you to look at these stories and say, well, what can I do with it? I've also found it helpful sometimes not just to take one story and do a piece about that, but there may be in the dozen or so stories that Phil had suggested to me some connections. There may be a thread that applies to a domestic story and to a foreign story, and there may be some way that you can tie those things together. You know, you can say people sure are forgetful, and then you find once you have discovered what the thread is going to be, then you look through all the stories looking for places where you can sew that thread. And if you find them, then you can, on a lucky day, then you can take 3 or 4 of the stories and put them into one piece And the piece is about, in this case, forgetfulness, but you actually talked about 4 different things that happened that day. You couldn't have done the story any other day than that day, because all these things just happened. And each is an example of the whatever the thing is that you have decided is your topic. I think that's a thing that hardly ever, nobody else has the opportunity that I have to do that, because I've got 2.5 minutes is a long time, really, to work with one thought.
Yes.
And at least it is in the very short attention span world of broadcasting. I mean, you could write a book on the subject of forgetfulness or any other topic that you wanted to, but to do 2.5 minutes on the air about a given subject and then to use examples from today or yesterday or last night, it's a terrific opportunity for me.
But the notion of doing 4 of them. So you mean to write a newspaper column once a day can send normal, loving men and women to drink and consternation. And for those of us who write on deadline maybe once a month, it's like we're walking this tremendous tight wire to ignominy and defeat and humiliation because we're not going to make our deadlines. Do you live in fear of any kind?
No.
No, I'm serious. I've always wanted to ask you this. How the hell do you do this and not? Do you drink a lot? No.
I've heard that there is some relationship between depends on how civilized, how advanced a culture is, as to how long it has to be between the time that you do something and the time that you're compensated for it. I mean, in the case of coal miners in the subcontinent or something like that, you have to pay them for every wheelbarrow of coal because they couldn't imagine doing it unless they were paid right then. I can only think about what I have to do now. I can't think about what I have to do tomorrow. I've already sort of touched on this, but
So, okay.
If you ask me, can you do a piece that runs 3 minutes and can you have it ready for me in an hour? No problem. If you ask me, will you put something together and have it for me on the 8th of May, 1994, that's what would throw me into panic.
Okay.
I don't know how you do something in a year from now. And that's what happens when you try to write books, by the way, is that you sit down with a publisher and the publisher says, well, let's see now, we've got to give you at least a year to do this. So then you say, I've got a year. That's all the time in the world. So you don't do it the first day or the second day. And the next thing you know, you're coming down to a deadline, and that's when you panic, because you haven't, I can take care of a deadline as long as the deadline is right in front of my eyes. As long as it's there, I can meet it. But if you tell me that, keep walking in that direction for 100 miles and suddenly Chicago will be there, that's what I have trouble doing, is working toward deadlines I can't see.
Have you changed your idea about what your mission is or what you're about over the years as you've done this?
Yes, I think so. I'm not sure that I can define that very well, but I think I'm more relaxed about it now than I was. I don't approach the microphone or the prospect of doing 4 broadcasts with fear. And I think that my stuff tends to be more optimistic now, more upbeat than it did when I was younger. My mission really has very little to do with explaining the world. It's not that I feel as if I have any particular insight into what's going on in the world or any particular knowledge of what's going on. But I have more of an awareness now than I did before of the fact that there's a lot of people out there listening and a lot of lives that you're touching, and you're doing it, as I say, at a sort of vulnerable time for them in the morning. And maybe what you say to them and how you frame what you say might make a difference in their lives. Maybe they'll look at the world. So I try not to be super cynical or to look for something that'll really drive people around the bend. I mean, I'm more likely to go for something that amuses me than I am for something that angers me in the morning.
Well, I think many of us listen to you. We don't say, oh, there's that liberal Osgood, or oh, there's that conservative Osgood. Do you have a kind of discernible political philosophy?
Well, people do say that, though. I mean, I get complaints from both liberals and from conservatives.
But
And
both.
of course, the conservatives think I'm too liberal, and liberals think I'm too conservative. And I think sometimes I feel very conservative. I agree with the conservative point of view, and other times not. And I don't think I'm very consistent in that. But in a way, I'm glad about that, because I don't feel as if I belong to some block. It's not to put anybody down, but I mean, nobody can think of me the way people think about Rush Limbaugh. You know that he represents a certain place on the political spectrum, and I don't think it's quite that easy to place me that way. Which is not to say that I don't have ideas on things as they come along. But generally, my ideas are not. It's not that I want you to think more right wing or more left wing about something. It's just that there are ways of looking at it that maybe can bring out some human dimension in it that's neither liberal nor conservative.
What time do you get out of the broadcast center?
It really varies. I'm often there till 3 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon. So a 12-hour day is not at all unusual for me.
What do you do when you finish with the radio pieces?
Well, that's when I don't work on programs most of the time, but I do. There's business to be done in connection with this. There are people who need to talk to you, and there's a fair amount of that. I mean, where I have to talk to somebody at the broadcast center who wants me to do something that's upcoming, or maybe there's a meeting that I have to go to, or there may be now, because I'm also doing commercials, there may be a sponsor that I'm going to be talking to, a trip that I'm going to be making in connection with one of these things.
You get a chance to read much?
I read every chance I get. I generally read myself to sleep, and I generally read en route. I read on airplanes. And
what do you read?
I read a lot of magazines. I read all the magazines I can get my hand on. And my wife is a big history buff, so she buys a lot of history books. And so I find myself maybe reading about Civil War or something like that doesn't really have anything to do with the contemporary issues. But you'd be surprised how often you see that the people were worried about some of the same things that we're worried about now. See, I have a feeling that most people, and it's not at all surprising, there's some great insight on my part, but what you're interested in is in your life, you're interested in your family, you're interested in your kids, and you're interested in putting food on the table, and where you're going to go on vacation, and you're interested in the things that occupy you in life. And after that, you are interested in what happens across the street and in your town and in your state and in your country and far away places in the world. But more and more, I think, because of news radio stations and because of television too, more and more, I think, we are aware of living in a world that we share with a lot of other people, and more we seem to understand that what happens to them is going to affect our lives, and it may well affect how hard or how easy it is for us to put food on the table, and whether the schools that we're sending our kids to are going to be the schools we want them to be, and where we're going to go on vacation, for that matter, because it may be that it becomes impossible. Every time you get on an airplane, you might worry that this is one that they're going to blow up.
You won't be going to Belgrade this spring.
That's right.
But when you talk about so convincingly about the close circle of our interests, our family, our friends, the church outing, are the Bulls going to win, all of those kinds of things, which I think we have to acknowledge, even those of us who are news people, who are supposed to be, we really are concerned about all those things. Then it seems to me that makes you a little more compassionate towards a president who has to deal with at what level do we then ask ourselves to get involved in Bosnia? I mean, it sounds to me like you're very sensitive to that.
Yes, that's absolutely right. I mean, I think, yes, you can say, yes, I think it would be nice if something could be done for the people in Bosnia, yes. But the first time you hear about it, you're not going to have any strong ideas or convictions or conclusions about it. I think it takes, the story has to be there for a while. It has to be talked about for a while. You have to read about it in the papers, hear about it on the radio, listen to what the president may have to say, somebody on a talk show, and then your ideas begin to evolve a little bit. You may say, well, I wish we could do something for those people. But I understand what's being suggested may not, in fact, be very good for those people. On a practical level, maybe it would, maybe it wouldn't. It's going cost an awful lot of money. Here we are with this, we're trying to do something about health care and stuff in this country. All these things have to be balanced. I mean, everybody wants to be president, but I've noticed that in the 4 years from the time a man is inaugurated president until he finishes his first term, they usually age about 20 years. And that's why.
But you carry these tremendous burdens, and you don't seem to age. Now take us out of the workplace. What's the secret? What do you do when you're not working?
Well, first of all, if I could address the question of whether I have tremendous burdens.
You don't accept the premise?
Not at all.
Okay.
Doug Edwards used to say, and I could not agree with him, that he never worked a day in his life. And I think that's also true. I mean, I just like doing what I know so much, and although I may not be crazed about getting into the first piece at the very moment that I get up in the morning, I still enjoy the process very much. It's something that pleases me, and I don't think of it as a great burden. And also, I think that people say, imagine you're talking to 12 million people or whatever it is, and that's a lot of power. I don't think of it as power at all. In the first place, I'm not trying to push anybody one way or the other, so I don't worry about power. I mean, the president has power, although not as much as people think. But a guy who does 5-minute radio broadcasts in the morning, it's not if you think of that as a burden, I mean, I think that when I go to work in the morning and my wife is home and she's got to schlep the kids around all day, that's a burden. That's hard work.
So that's why you go to work.
So I go to work so I don't have to, exactly.
He's got 5 kids. I mean, let's get our priorities right.
Yes, there are days when I've stayed home, for some reason, and I realize that this is work. It's when you go into the office that things are reasonably calm.
All right, so that the print will except I think there is power in moving all those Nordic products, but we'll get back to that in a minute.
Okay.
But how do you relax when you're not relaxing at work?
Well, we already talked about the fact that I read some, although I say I'm actually in motion when I do a lot of the reading, on planes and trains and stuff. But I sit at the piano a lot. And that's for me, that's a great relaxation. It's non-verbal, so it relaxes whatever parts of your brain need to think of a good word to rhyme with piano. It also, I have a feeling that the music part of what I do, although I'm nobody's idea of a great or even a good musician, but I think that there is a musical component in good writing, and that the music of a sentence that you put together, the way it has a beginning and it has an end, and there's phrasing and there's color and there's all those things in speech that there are in music, and I think a sense of that, a sense of pace, and whether you're going too fast or too slow, and whether the next word is going to come the way will the chord resolve now, or you're going to throw some extra tension into it. These are not conscious things, but they're unconscious, and they influence what you do. So anyway, I'm maybe that's just an excuse, because like I said, when I'm sitting at the piano, in a sense, I'm working. I'm working that part of my consciousness or subconsciousness that does that. So anyway, I like to do that. I like to sit and watch basketball games and other sports.
Any comments on the Knicks and the Bulls? We're going to get to the point now. This is all warm-up. We're going to get to the real issue.
Well, we in New York have all the respect in the world for the Bulls.
Sure.
I think if they could figure some way to tie Michael Jordan's shoelaces together, and Scottie Pippen's shoelaces together, the Knicks would have a better shot at all this. But I think it's a very exciting year, because although the Bulls are still just a fabulous team, and everybody's in awe of Jordan and everybody else on the court, I think that there are other teams who have a shot at it this year, and the Knicks are one of them. And I think if you watch one team a lot and you kind of get to be a fan of that team, then maybe you're just deluding yourself, but I think the Knicks really do have a good shot at this. They've got to get past the Hornets as their next. They got to pass that team, and that's to me, the basketball is a very exciting sport because every team that you face has got some challenge that's different from the team that you just got past.
I want to go back to writing for just a second. Do you ever hear from poets about your poetry?
No. No. As a matter of fact, I had an invitation a couple of years ago to speak to the New England Poets Society. They were meeting at Harvard. And I thought, these people are going to throw rotten fruit at me when I... But I was really quite surprised at the reception that I got. They think that what I do is fun. It's doggerel verse, but there's nothing the matter with that. That's not a, they say don't, because I was saying, I realize that I'm not a real poet. I'm just I do the equivalent of greeting card verse, and they say no. They all wanted me to know that poetry that I do qualifies as poetry. That it's real poetry, and I think it would be too bad if I took myself seriously on that score. If I really thought that this was an important contribution to the language as far as poetry is concerned. But to me, a limerick is a good way to. Limericks are funny, and we laugh at them for some reason. If you took the same informational content that's in a limerick and put it some other way, it wouldn't be funny. Exactly. So, if I can take some words and rhyme them and tell a story, and a few places in the story there's that sense that you get when you've heard a limerick where the language has been used in some different way. I think it's a good way to tell a story. And in fact, it occurs to me that the original newscasters, the minstrels who would travel around and they'd make up these little songs back in medieval and prior to that about what went on in the next village and what was happening to Squire so-and-so, what the king or the prince or the sheriff was doing in the next town. It sort of was the news. And when people talk about poetic license, that's what they mean. Because those people were permitted to do this even though, because it fit into the song and they were given a little privilege of doing this, and people got a lot of information that way.
I think the thing that was the most astounding when we first started to hear it from you was when you would take actualities, the recordings of persons being interviewed, and they would say, and that's why I'm running for county sheriff, and then you would come in with your rhymes and so on. That truly, to me, was a groundbreaking moment in American radio, if not poetry.
As you say that, I'm trying to think of, oh my God, what rhymes with sheriff? Tariff.
Tariff, absolutely. Yeah, right. As Bruce mentioned, I've gone back to the University of Chicago part-time to run the Benton Fellowship Program in Broadcast Journalism, and we discuss, the important issues of the day, ethics, etc. And somebody said the other day, Osgood, our beloved Charles, is doing commercials. My God, what's happened? Tabloid news on Channel 2, Osgood doing commercials. And I said, God, I wish he were here. And now you are.
So I am.
Why are you doing it? How did that come about?
That's proof right there that it doesn't kill you to do a commercial.
That's right. Yeah, right. How did that come about? Because CBS News for years had a prohibited news correspondent from doing commercials.
And while I was a CBS News correspondent, I couldn't do commercials.
So then you went.
And I cannot do commercials at the same. You can't do a commercial if you are doing newscasts. And so I really wanted to do commercials. Mind you, I never took a journalism course, so I may have missed the part in Journalism 101 where it says that if you ever do a newscast, then you can never do a commercial ever again. It may say that in there somewhere, but I missed that page. I happen to believe that commercials are very important in commercial broadcasting.
So does the management of this radio station.
Hence the phrase commercial broadcasting. Yeah. And every penny that I've ever made in this business, and for that matter, every penny that Ed Morrow or Walter Cronkite or Eric Severide ever made in this business came from commercials. So I don't think they're dirty. I think that's the way commercial television works. and commercial radio works. I agree with the idea that you shouldn't be both things, that you shouldn't be a newscaster and then do commercials too.
Why not?
Well, because I think that there may be the suggestion that what you're giving me as news was influenced. Maybe the guy who is the local car dealer made, says, hey, I want you to use this news item here. There's an item about how our cars are better than the next guy's cars, and so you can put that somewhere in the news. And when I was working for CBS News and doing newscasts, I agreed with that, and I would not like to hear Dan Rather start doing news. I mean, to start doing commercials. So, but I want to do commercials. The business has changed a lot. It was perfectly clear to me that radio always was always going to be more important for me than television, and that in radio, the way that you could make the greatest mark, the way that you could do the most for the company you work for, in this case CBS, and for yourself, is to do what Paul Harvey and Rush Limbaugh and Larry King, people like that do. And that means that you don't run around doing commercials for just everybody that comes along, but you do commercials on your own broadcasts. You don't say anything that's not true. And the same standards that apply, by the way, to your journalism, also then you have to have those apply to your commercials. I sort of feel what I do is I'm a storyteller anyway. I take the stuff that's in the news and I try to assemble it in some kind of a coherent story. And that's what I can say to an advertiser. I can take your story. You either have a story or you don't. If I don't believe your story, or if it's not particularly interesting, then that would not be of particular interest to me to do those commercials. But the things that I'm doing, the commercials that I'm doing now, are all things that I can. I'm doing some commercials for MetLife, dealing with these characters of Linus and Snoopy and all of that. The commercials go to Charles Schultz before they, to make sure that they're okay. I'm getting a tremendous kick out of doing that. In other words, I like doing the commercials, and I don't have any sense at all that I'm betraying anybody. I was willing to accept not being a CBS News correspondent anymore, but I took no lifetime vow to always be a CBS News correspondent. We had a little ceremony. I stood up and they tore the epaulets off my shoulders. They clipped the buttons off and they slapped me across the face a couple of times.
But I think your first point is really worth remembering, because, as you said, if you're in commercial broadcasting, that has right there is a certain framework to it. And therefore, I remember when I was VP in New York, we used to have an exercise we would go through in which you had to prepare Messrs. Paley and Stanton for the board meeting and any hostile questions.
Yeah.
And so Sam Diggs came around one day and said, I want you to think of the really most adversarial, difficult question you can think of for Mr. Paley that he might get, and then also think of the answer, which was not the fun part. And the question I came up with was, Mr. Paley, is your ban against commercials by CBS News correspondents and anchors a principled one? Theoretical answer, yes. Question, are you proud of your all-news service? Answer, very proud. Do you maintain the same standards for your all-news service as you do for CBS News? Absolutely. Then what are your all-news people doing? Doing commercials. Mm-hmm. And of course, the answer to that is, to be viable commercially, economically, you've already invented the most expensive way in the world to do a radio station. Then if you were going to say that the local people couldn't do commercials, then you're really asking for a problem.
See, that's absolutely right. The other thing is that I would feel differently if CBS had come to me and said, Osgood, you've never done a commercial in your life, and now you do this commercial, you're out. I wouldn't have liked that very much. But it didn't work that way. I actually went to them. And I said, it's perfectly clear to me that radio is for me, more important than television. It's also perfectly clear to me that I understand very well how this works, how the business works. I understand that it is a business. I understand that I'm a professional working in this business, and professional means you do it for a living. And I've got 5 kids, I've got to send them to college, and I've got, a mortgage, and the same things everybody else has. And if you actually can think of a way that you can do what you do and get as much pleasure out of it as you've gotten before, you can be just as creative, and there's going to be no limitations on what you can say, and that your you're able to select the advertisers that you choose, I think anybody would do it. And as I say, I don't feel that this is a religious kind of question. I'm happy to be doing these commercials. I think everybody likes to do what they think they're good at, and I think I'm good at it, and I don't find any conflict between doing that and then telling the story that I'm going to tell. So I'm happy doing them, and
You sound happy doing them.
yeah,
Is that getting flatter with each?
it takes time, John. And but in fact, it is getting flatter. I mean, I realize it's not very flat, but
No, that wasn't the question.
It does
Flatter.
take time. Flatter is
Yes.
the.
By the way, I want to confess, I would love to have one great commercial account. You know, like a great bookstore. No, really, in which you come on and you sell
Books.
good reading.
Yeah.
I'd like to tell you about this novel. I mean,
Can
that
I say one other thing about the business of selling?
Yeah.
There have always been people who thought that there was something nasty about selling,
Yeah.
huckstering, and but to me, see, my father was a salesman, and I grew up in a house of a guy who did nothing, but he went around and he sold. Sometimes I went on trips with him.
What do you sell?
Textiles. He worked for a company called Indian Head Mills. He sold fabric and sheets and pillowcases, and he sold them to stores. I mean, he worked for this company, and he was out on the road, calling on stores and taking care of them. He knew his customers. He was a good salesman, and I've always thought that I like salesmen. I like going into a store, and I like people to sell me things. I like somebody to tell me why should I want to buy a suit. Tell me why I should buy this particular suit. And if he can tell me why, so much the better. I don't like it. They say, there they are, pick them out. What you see, we've got. What you don't see, we haven't got. Let me know when you've decided it, and I'll ring it up for you.
So you like the art of selling.
Yes, I think it's terrific.
And then
And
you
I think
must like the economic outcome of it. That is to say, jobs are created, people
I
have
think
bread
it's-
on the table. It's a very
Somebody
serious
once said,
business.
unless somebody sells something, nothing happens.
You got it.
And I think that that's what makes the world go around. And if you're against selling, then how can you be for you want the economy to be good, but you don't want anybody to sell anything.
Right.
That's ridiculous. It really is.
But this talk was good. We thank you for being with us. And since you didn't get it in North Dallas, God bless you.